I'm here with Celeste Watkins-Hayes, professor of sociology and African American studies at Northwestern University, and author of Remaking a Life: How Women Living with HIV/AIDS Confront Inequality. My name is Jeff Berry. I'm editor of Positively Rare magazine, and we're really grateful to have you here with us here today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be with you, Jeff.
So you'll be presenting during the one of the plenaries at AIDS 2020 virtual next week on, I believe it's Wednesday, July 8th, during the Prime Session 1 Social Factors. And just a reminder to folks who are viewing, if you want to participate in the conference, you can do so by registering. You need to register at AIDS2020.org, and then you can view all the presentations and take part in the conference. So, so tell us about the plenary that you're going to be doing next week and what you'll be speaking about.
So thanks for having me, Jeff. I have been charged with talking about social factors related to the epidemic, which is a very big topic, as we all know. So I really had to think about a way to, first of all, center us in just the reality in which we find ourselves. So, of course, we are unfortunately not in calm times when we think about what's happening in the world. We are confronting a new epidemic, COVID-19. We are seeing global protests around racial injustice, and we're continuing to battle many of the issues that we have been battling in the HIV community since the start of the epidemic. When we think about inequality on the basis of race, sexuality, gender identity, and class. So there are some ways in which the social issues are very old, and there are other ways in which we are facing some new challenges. So I wanted to think about a way to acknowledge that, and then to talk about some of the scientific research that's happening as it relates to HIV and social factors.
Sounds fascinating. So, yeah, so I'd like to maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the issues that are really old and some of the ones that we're seeing now and some of the parallels maybe or differences that you might be seeing.
Absolutely. The analogy that I give is we are hearing a lot of language about us all being in the same boat. And you heard that a lot with COVID, and you also hear it when we talk about the HIV epidemic. But what I argue is that unfortunately, we're not all in the same boat. To continue the analogy, some of us are grappling with these issues in rowboats, and others of us are grappling with these issues in yachts. And we can think about that disparity in terms of countries and the resources available to countries. We can think about that variation in terms of organizational infrastructure. We can talk about that disparity in terms of organizational wealth, in terms of organizations confronting the HIV epidemic. And then we can think about that disparity on an individual level when we think about how people are grappling with HIV from places of extreme marginalization or positions of marginalization with some level of privilege. So what I think is really useful about social scientific frameworks is, first of all, to help us understand that analogy. We are in fact in the same turbulent waters, and we are battling these waters together, but we're doing it from different positions, from different boats. So the question becomes, how do we make sure that we're strengthening the boats for people who have fewer resources to battle the epidemic, who are grappling with the legacies and the contemporary effects of homophobia, transphobia, class division, anti-poverty sentiment, racism, sexism. So part of what's really important for us to understand is that while we are absolutely fighting an illness, we're also fighting what I call injuries of inequality. So the ways in which, yes, it's about HIV, but it's also about all of the other social factors that coexist with and contribute to the HIV epidemic, such that while anyone can contract HIV, it is not the case that we are all equally at risk. Some of us are at more risk than others by virtue of the boat in which we're existing.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, and a lot has happened this year, you know, between the launch of your book, which we'll go to in a second, and and with the and where we are now. And so not only with COVID, but with the murder of George Floyd
Yes.
and so many others, um, how does that affect, or what does that add to the discussion? Or, I don't know if that's the right word I'm looking for, but so much has changed in the last 6 months. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
how do you weave that into the discussion and in a way that's constructive and meaningful and helpful to folks?
Absolutely. So I think the broader way to understand it is to know that we are in a social justice movement, and HIV and the fight against HIV is one component of this broader and global social justice movement. Because really, what we are all confronting are the ways in which power dynamics have rendered some highly vulnerable and some over resourced and overserved, if you will, as it relates to opportunities and protective mechanisms to confront illnesses like HIV and a whole host of other issues. So when we think about it, really what we're all thinking about is how do we do better at leveling the playing field? How do we strengthen those rowboats? By giving more resources, more opportunities, more assistance, more voice, more control, right? Because it's not just about who's in what boat, but it's also about who's steering each boat, right? So part of it is how do we think about creating a more equitable system as it relates to health, as it relates to policing, as it relates to how we allocate resources, as it relates to a whole host of issues to make our society more just. Because what we have learned in very, very stark relief, we knew this in the HIV epidemic, but we are particularly experiencing it in the COVID epidemic, is that if we don't address those inequalities, it can affect all of us. So none of us are insulated from the effects and implications of inequality. None of us can escape the realities, because even if we're in those yachts, we still rely on the people who are in rowboats for our essential services. They're still part of our families. They're still part of our communities. They're still part of the larger societal system in which we all function and coexist. So we owe one another to make sure that we're creating a system that is more protective for all of us.
Powerful stuff. Thank you, Dr. Watkins-Hayes. So about the book, so Remaking a
Yes,
Life,
thanks, Jeff.
um, and I see it back there on your bureau. So
Yeah.
so that just launched this year. Tell us a little bit about that and how that got started and what that's about.
Well, I have T-Pan to thank, so I'm really excited to tell this story. In 2005, I started interviewing women living with HIV, and I was looking for a community partner in terms of where would be a place where I could not only interview women, but also this would be a place to recruit women and to tell them about the study and to get them involved. And it was T-Pan who gave me that opportunity. And it was really wonderful to meet the community of women who were part of T-Pan and then to expand the study. So over the course of 10 years, my research team and I ended up interviewing over 100 women living with HIV in the Chicago area. And what was so interesting is we heard their stories, some of whom were connected to T-Pan, some of whom were not, or that women talked about this trajectory that I call dying from to living with to thriving despite. When they received their diagnoses, many believed that an HIV diagnosis meant a death sentence, and not just a physical death sentence, a social death sentence, in terms of what would this mean in terms of the stigma, what would this mean in terms of community and my ability to connect with people, my ability to be loved, my ability to be a part of something. So really what they were concerned about was dying from HIV, but also dying from the stigma And then, as we know, given that HIV is an injury of inequality, women were dying from a whole host of other challenges. They were dying from poverty. They were dying from the afterlife of experiences with childhood sexual trauma. They were dying from lack of resources. They were dying from racism. They were dying from a whole host of things. So one of the things that I began to track in my book is the conversation that women had about moving from dying from to living with, to which is a place where they get to a place of stability where they are not necessarily in constant crisis, where they're strengthening their support system, where they're strengthening their health, to then what I call thriving despite, meaning they're taking leadership roles in their communities and families and organizations. They're engaging in policy discussions. They're really helping to inform the conversation around HIV, but a whole host of other issues. So as I talk to women about that movement from dying from to living with and to thriving despite, trying to understand for those who got stuck, why was that? But for those who were able to move, what fueled that? And I think it came down to two things. Number one, the women's resilience and agency in terms of their desire to begin their lives anew, if you will, and to really think about what does life after diagnosis look like, and how can I create something that is meaningful and something that is powerful. But the second component of what moved women from dying from to living with to thriving despite is the work of the HIV Safety Net. So what I do in the book is that while I trace the stories of the women through that trajectory, I also trace the development of the HIV Safety Net. What is the safety net? It is a community of service providers and activists and advocates and policy officials who have been involved in the HIV response and have over time built a network of community organizations, of healthcare policies like the Ryan White Care Act and the AIDS Drug Assistance Program, who have really educated the public, who have changed the conversation around HIV. So really through their connection to the HIV safety net, women are able to move along that trajectory. So the book kind of offers a dual narrative of the women, but it also offers a history of the development of the HIV safety net.
Wow, that is so much information. That really good information. And that safety net is unfortunately under fire right now.
Absolutely.
And we got to do everything we can to help protect that and shore that up, because it's going to be really important in the years to come.
Absolutely. And it's really important, I think, for the HIV community to not only work hard to protect it, but to point to how the safety net is actually a model that can be replicated and should be replicated in other arenas. So the HIV community has something to teach the world about how do you build a safety net around a health crisis. And there are four components of the HIV safety net. Number one, access to healthcare, which we know is going to continue to be very, very important for people living with HIV and those who are experience higher risk contexts. But it's also going to be important as we think about our COVID-19 response and in our continuing discussion around healthcare as a right. So the HIV community is able to point to tangible results and outcomes for what happens when people get access to healthcare and how they're able to improve their health outcomes, but how they're able to do so many other things in terms of their role in our communities when their health is stable. The second thing that the HIV community has done in terms of the safety net is building in very, very robust social support. So it's not just getting access to healthcare, it's about building community. It's about building community so that people are able to confront stigma, so that they know they're not alone, so that they can gather the tools and the information that they're going to need to survive, so that they can engage with peer mentors and role models. So, we know the phrase, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And the HIV community has essentially operationalized that by ensuring that there are opportunities for people living with HIV to see themselves living and thriving and taking leadership roles in their communities. The third thing that the HIV safety net does very effectively is that it provides people assistance as it relates to their basic economic needs. So whether it's helping people find employment, even employing them within the HIV community as peer mentors and peer advocates, and bringing them into employment in service agencies, or whether it's making sure that people who need economic assistance through unemployment or social security, disability insurance are able to get access to it, because those bureaucracies can be hard to navigate. So part of what the HIV community does through case management and peer navigators and other assistance is to help people navigate and to think about how they're going to economically subsist. And then the final thing that the HIV safety net does very effectively is that it provides people an on-ramp to political and civic engagement. So the HIV community has done a phenomenal job of turning the personal into the political. So helping people understand, how can telling my story be used to advocate for policy, to make change, to change the narrative, to participate in how we see ourselves in terms of our movies and our TV shows and all kinds of things that are really critical for people to be able to see themselves. The HIV community has created all of these on-ramps for people to be able to do that, whether it's doing one's first speaking engagement where you're talking to a group, or participating in AIDS Watch, or helping to contribute to narratives in terms of all of these content producers that we now see on YouTube and other outlets of people living with HIV sharing their experiences, and people who are who come from communities that are greatly affected by HIV speaking out, sharing what they know, and shaping the narrative. So those are the four things that the HIV community does that I think are going to be very helpful when we think about other healthcare issues like COVID and some of the other debates that we're going to be having around access to healthcare and what we truly mean by that in the years to come.
Thank you, Dr. Celeste Watkins-Hayes. Once again, we're looking forward to seeing you at AIDS 2020 virtual next week during your plenary session at AIDS 2020 on July 8th, Wednesday, July 8th. And reminding folks that if they do want to see the conference, they can do so. They register at AIDS2020.org. If you want to learn more about Dr. Watkins-Hayes and her work, please visit us at positivelyaware.com. And look forward to seeing you next week, Dr. Watkins-Hayes.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Truly appreciate it. Thanks to you. Thanks to Positively Aware and TPAN, Barb Marcotte, who worked with me on this project early on when I approached TPAN. And I just want to say thank you so much for everyone listening. And I hope you find the conference enriching. All the best to you.
Thanks. You too.